Hello, horror fans. It's me, Kylie, and today I have on Chris Vander Kaay, the director of and writer of Go to Sleep. He also does the found footage finds on Found TV. If you guys haven't watched Go to Sleep yet, it's on Found TV, but I don't know what you're doing with your life because it's absolutely incredible. But we're going to talk about found footage, just horror movies in general, and his movie Go to Sleep. And like I said, if you haven't seen it yet, go watch it. It's on Found TV. Found TV is amazing if you are a huge found footage fan like I am, and their subscription is $4.99 a month, which is pretty reasonable with no ads. And even if you don't pay that, you still can watch the stuff for free. But Go to Sleep is about a recently separated man, newly just living alone, kind of discovering that he is sleepwalking at night. And he's recording his activities and discovers some pretty crazy behaviors and the presence of just a mysterious guy as well. So, how are you doing tonight, Chris?
Good. Thank you so much for having me on. And I do just want to say, I appreciate all of the credit for the movie. I will say I was the co-writer and the star and the producer, but it was actually
Yes.
Steven Espinoza who directed it. So I don't want to steal his credit while he's not here.
Yes, I'm so sorry. You even just said
no
that
worries.
before we got on. Yeah. But we're going to go ahead and get into it.
Welcome to the Horrorcraft Podcast.
Okay, all right. And we're back. So, Chris, what was your first horror movie you ever watched?
Well, so I was raised by pretty strict Christian parents, so I wasn't actually allowed to see an R-rated movie. I basically just wasn't allowed to see R-rated movies. So the first one I probably would have seen that was a horror film was probably I watched Alien at my friend's house at a sleepover when I was maybe 16 or 17. But I think the place where I got the taste for horror movies was there was a very short era in Disney live action films in the early 1980s. And they sort of call it the dark Disney era, where it was stuff like Watcher in the Woods and some of the Witch Mountain movies. Those were probably the first things that I watched that that really it woke something up in me that I was like trying to figure out how to connect back with. And even some of the animated movies, there's just some very dark, weird stuff that Disney did for a while. The animated version of Alice in Wonderland is sort of interestingly sort of very dark in some ways as well. Literally, like the main character is constantly having the threat of her head being chopped off. So that was where I think it was born. And then eventually I saw Alien with my friend, and then I snuck the movie, the first Halloween, into the house to watch as well. So those probably would have been my first tastes of like legitimate horror. And so I think I kind of got lucky because I moved straight from like kid stuff into some of the most well-known and well-received horror movies of all time. So
yeah, absolutely. Alien and Aliens, that's one of Cass's favorite. She likes the Aliens. I love Predator. That's my guy.
Yeah.
But what was your first found footage horror movie that you ever watched that just kind of made you fall in love with found footage horror?
Well, so the first movie I saw that could fall into that category, it's technically more fake doc than found footage, but it was I saw Blair Witch when it opened. I went and drove 2 hours in Texas in theaters to see it. But 4 years before that, maybe 4 years before that, I saw, because I had friends who were big art house movie fans, they showed me a French fake documentary called Man Bites Dog. Which is basically about a film crew following a serial killer around to see how he does his job. And it's only technically horror in the sense that it's a serial killer and there's a couple of sequences that are pretty disturbing. By and large, it's a very dark satire. It's very funny and very sort of brutally comedic. But I really loved it. And I've always been drawn to things that aren't documentaries but look like they are. I saw This Is Spinal Tap my first year of high school, and then this. I used to love the Christopher Guest movies, Best in Show and all of those. So I've always been drawn to the idea of the artifice of it looking like a documentary or looking like filmed material that isn't. But yeah, for sure, Man Bites Dog would have been the first exposure that I had. Before I even knew found footage was a genre, I had seen that one.
Right. I've never heard of that one. I do know because like a lot of people do think like Blair Witch Project was like the first found footage movie ever, and it really wasn't. The ones that I know, even I guess before that there was like The Last Broadcast, but even like before that there was Cannibal Holocaust and Faces of Death. Those aren't really my kind of like found footage horror movies.
I can understand. I always get a little uncomfortable with cannibalism myself. I'm just not. It's not my subgenre, and those both fall largely into that category to some degree. But no,
Yeah.
you're right. So it's interesting because theoretically, Cannibal Holocaust is the first found footage movie. In that the plot of the
Hmm.
movie is that the half of the movie that's narrative is about people going to try and find a film crew that disappeared, and then the rest of the movie is the footage that they found. So it's literally
Yeah.
a found footage movie, but half of it's actually not found footage. So it's kind of a hybrid. But then, I mean, if you're talking about like things that look like documentaries but are actually scripted, that goes all the way
Hmm.
back to, the opening of Citizen Kane in 1930, whatever it was, 30,
Yeah.
I don't remember, 40, maybe the 40s. That movie, the opening was a fake newsreel that he shot to show you the whole story of Charles Foster Kane. So like as far back as Orson Welles in the 40s, they were doing fake documentaries. You could argue
Yeah.
that the original broadcast of War of the Worlds, the audio broadcast, which was pretending to be a radio news broadcast, is technically found footage. It's just audio. So the genre has been around for a very long time. It's just never really been codified and given a title up until some more popular ones broke through, like the Blair Witch Project.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't imagine being, on the side of like the radio when they first premiered like War of the Worlds and how absolutely terrifying that had to be. And but that really kind of that falls into the category really. It's just kind of a little bit different. Now, what inspired you to start like making movies?
Well, so from a very young age, I was interested in the idea of fantastical worlds and storytelling, but I didn't really understand the way that movies got made. I didn't think that was a thing you just decided to go do. Like when you're young, or at least when I was young and sort of in the protected environment I was raised in, it wasn't very realistic that that was a thing I would do. But I could just sign up to go act in a drama class. And so in high school, I think it was in high school, I took my very first drama class. But what I discovered is that I wasn't really interested in acting. I was interested in storytelling. And that was just the only thing I knew I could be involved in for no money, was to go do it in school for free. But I did discover, because in class you could write your own monologues and scenes and stuff like that, I really got bit by the writing bug. That was the thing that was most interesting to me. And so I, floundered around for a very long time, tried to write some things. And then back in, I want to say 2012, I actually met someone who wanted to make a feature-length Western. I wrote a Western screenplay, and it ended up it was changed largely, but it was turned into a faith-based Western that was made for about $1 million, and it premiered on the Hallmark Movie Channel in 2014. And so that was my first taste of having made anything, was really that movie. And so my career has been sort of backwards, because I started with to this day, still the biggest thing that I've ever worked on, which is $1 million Western that premiered on
Yeah.
cable. But then I could not get work at any point after that for years, because my only credit was a faith-based Western on the Hallmark Channel. But what I wanted to make was horror movies. And like, that doesn't
Right.
really prepare you. Like, nobody looks at that as a success that makes sense for them to bet on me for anything else. And so I
Right.
struggled for a really long time. And then when I made Ask, my first feature film, it was basically as a sort of, I'm really tired of waiting for permission for something of mine to get made. I have to write something, and then someone else has to read it and then like it and then find money and then go make it themselves. I was like, if I was not happy with the way the Western turned out, it was not what I had wanted. And I was like, well, if somebody's going to screw up my work, I suppose it could just be me. I could just screw it up, and then I don't have to worry about it. At the very least, it would be my mistakes that caused it. But I was like, I don't have the money for it. And that's when, my love for and cataloging of found footage movies made me think, well, wait a minute. There are found footage movies that look like they cost nothing. Maybe you can actually make a found footage movie that costs nothing. And so I did. I made The Ask, which was, less than $200. And I shot it in 2024, or came out in 2024. I shot it late 2025 and part of 2024. And it was, yeah, like I said, spent less than $200, and I sort of just reverse engineered real things that were happening in my life that sort of were the impetus for me to do it. And I just created a narrative out of stuff that was happening in my life so that I didn't have to find a way to get all this production value. I just sort of, quote unquote, stole it from what was happening in my life.
See, I love that, because I think people really get the found footage genre really like misconstrued because of, I think, like Paranormal Activity, Blair Witch Project. But like, I feel like in the found footage genre, you're able to take those things a lot more sometimes and turn it into something terrifying. Just that like real life horror aspect, like real life things happening that can be horrific. And then it is easier to make movies that are found footage horror movies rather than like expecting, the budget of a studio and things like that. And a lot of people do not realize what it takes to make a movie, and you can't just go make a movie. The money doesn't come out of thin air.
Yep.
And a lot of times people don't want to give you the money to make these movies.
Yeah.
So
well, and
I guess
I often compare found footage filmmaking to like community theater and punk rock music, because those were movements within their own art forms that were like, well, maybe we don't need permission from somebody else. Maybe we can just do it. A guy grabbed a guitar, learned 3 power chords, and then, started a band. And that's where punk rock came from. Or community theater was just like, well, what about, there are people around here that would like to act. Let's just do a play that doesn't cost us any money and do it here. Let's do Shakespeare here in, Weehawken, New Jersey, And so there's that same spirit, I think, with found footage films, which is to say, we don't need permission from anyone. We just need people who are interested and passionate to do it, and a good idea. And then we just go, well, there's not always a good idea. We know that. But like the inspiration and the passion is there. And hopefully you have a good idea.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. There's many, subgenres of horror. I have just always loved found footage horror. I just find it to be more scary at times. And if you're able to make me scared in super subtle ways, like you've got me, or if you have me checking on Google, did this actually happen? You made a good found footage horror movie. But I've just found a really nice sense of community more in the found footage genre than I think other ones. Sometimes people in the horror community can be brutal. The fans, like the people making them, the people doing the content creation stuff, it can be kind of brutal. So
Yeah.
what inspired you to create found footage finds?
Well, I mean, honestly, a lot of the conversations we're having here were part of what made me want to do it, which is that twofold. One, there are so many found footage films in a year, found footage and fake doc movies, because the threshold is lower for someone to be able to make one. You get more of them. Now, that doesn't mean they're all good, but it means there are more of them. And in a way, that's great, because I think it means that there are a bunch of people who are able to have the dream of making a movie come true in a way that never was possible before, maybe the early 90s. But the other reason that I wanted to make it, so the first reason was to talk about the many movies, because even the most dedicated found footage fan can't find all of them. And so I thought, well, let's have a show where we gather them by subgenre. But then the other reason was, I have always felt like this is an interesting genre. It's the only one that was invented in the 20th century, the only genre of film that was invented in the 20th century. It's the newest one. It's the one that is most embracing of technology immediately of any of the other ones. The second that a new kind of camera comes out or a new way to broadcast an image comes out, found footage finds a way to incorporate that into some sort of storytelling, Zoom calls or 360 camera or, dozens of things, drones, telling whole stories or whole segments of anthologies with a single specific, interesting kind of camera. The genre has been groundbreaking, and I also think has a lot to say about society, but it doesn't get talked about with the level of scholarly respect that other film genres do. Like, nobody talks about found footage the way that they talk about dramas or science fiction films, and I didn't like that, because I think it deserves it. And so the reason I wanted to make found footage is because I was like, we can answer two things here. We can make a lot of recommendations, but we can also talk about the interesting aspects of how these are groundbreaking historical things, or how they are, where they came from, what the origin of them was, how far back it goes and things like that. Like in the Bigfoot episode, we talk about the Patterson-Gimlin footage, the very first footage that was ever exposed of Bigfoot, which is technically looks like found footage and influenced the
Yeah.
style of found footage films, especially Bigfoot films, for 60 years now, So there's just a lot of interesting things worth talking about. And I just don't see people giving it that kind of respect that I felt like it deserved. So I wanted to make a show about it.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely don't think that found footage gets like the respect and credit that it should. You're just able to do so many different things. You're able to talk about so many different things. Like I just recently did a review and like a rewatch on the conspiracy, and compared to now and from when the first time I watched it, it's very scary because of how real it feels more real now than it did when the very first time I watched it. But you're able to take some of these real life things with cults, serial killers, Bigfoot, Mothman, just many different things, and you're able to turn it into a movie, and you have the audience questioning, was this real or was it not?
Yeah.
That's
Well, and
another.
an interesting thing I talk about all the time with found footage that I don't think people realize. They think of it as a subgenre of horror, but actually found footage itself isn't even a genre. It's actually just a format. You can do literally any genre in found footage or fake documentary style. And because of that, like animation, you can literally tell any story in that format. So in a way, it's more flexible, and there's more kinds of things that you can do with found footage than almost anything else. With a drama, there's a specific window for what it needs to be to fit a drama or a science fiction. For a found footage film, it can be any of those things plus be a found footage film at the same time. So in a way, like it's actually much more versatile than other kinds of filmmaking.
It really is. It really is. Now, what do you think makes a found footage truly effective?
So I've struggled with this for a while because I do feel like there are different camps of people who like certain kinds of found footage films for different reasons. And I think those are all viable reasons. I'm sort of a big tent guy in that respect. And what I mean by that is I love the idea of an in-world camera, right? A story in which the camera that's recording these events exists in the world and the characters know about it to some degree. So that's your fake documentaries, that's your, security camera style footage, that's found footage, whatever they are. I love all of those. And the reason is because when the camera exists in the world along with the events of the story, in a way, it allows us to take the same position as the characters in the story because they're recording it as it's happening to them. We're watching it through the cameras they're recording it with. And so in a way, we are far more connected to the people in the story than we are in a narrative story where there is no camera connecting us to them and allowing us to see their experience through the way that they're having it. So what makes it effective for me is honestly, it's good storytelling and it's an effective and clever use of I'll call it the conceit of it being a fake documentary or found footage. And what I mean by that is I don't love a movie when it's just like, it was clear that they made this because they couldn't afford to make it narrative. So they just turned it into a found footage story, but it doesn't really add anything to the story in any way. Like it wouldn't have basically been different except for the fact that it was way cheaper to do it like this. And we could shoot it in 2 weekends instead of what would have taken a month and a half and a lot of money to make it narrative. So I don't love that because I feel like that is just kind of like a cashing in thing or like a desperation move. But almost any other subgenre, almost any other kind of film, I like when it really utilizes the idea of this is being recorded. There's some sort of clever conceit to that, whether it's it's a glasses cam or it's, like I said, a 360 camera. I've even seen one. There was a movie where the whole segment was shot with a what do they call those forward-looking infrared? Where you just see the sort of like the red blobs of things moving around.
Yeah.
Like I love the idea of how many different ways you can utilize it. So for me, that's what makes it effective is when one can come up with a good story, but also a really interesting reason for something to have been recorded and for the way that we interact with it to be different than the way we would have in any other kind of narrative story.
Most definitely. Now, what are some of your all-time favorite found footage movies?
Well, I think this is a fairly popular one, at least within the circles that I travel, Facebook groups and things like that. But one of, I think, the most effective ones that I've ever watched is Savage Land. And the reason for that, aside from the fact that it perfectly captures the vibe of, a special episode of 48 Hours about something that happened at the border, the kind of stuff that 65-year-old grandmas watch on CBS and then send you an email about watch out for if you're in Texas. It has that, it perfectly captures that vibe. But in addition to that, it's also the single best usage I've ever seen for found media. There's a sequence in the movie with a single roll of film, I think it's 27 photographs. And the way that the movie slowly takes you through the journey of what this man has been through in this town through nothing but 27 still images is masterful piece of storytelling. And the way that they interact with it, they talk about the inference of what a single still image means, like what happened right before and right after. I've never seen something more effectively use a little snippet of a thing to tell a gigantic story. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, I just recently watched Savage Land for the first time. I was a little embarrassed to even say this the first time I watched it. I constantly have like a list of things that like I want to watch or things to watch, and like we were talking about before, I have ADHD, other things get my attention. But I was just very impressed. It was just such an original idea. And I really enjoyed it. I like the documentary style. I'm a huge fan of like Strange Harvest. I don't know if you've seen it, Hunting Matthew Nichols. That was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one yet. I have a short list like you. And that's another thing too. I feel like in found footage communities, people work very hard to try and find new movies and go out looking for them. And so I don't find there to be anywhere near as much gatekeeping or judgment in the found footage community as I do in other fandoms. And I really appreciate that because I think we all understand. It's like sometimes there's an amazing movie you've just never heard of because it only costs $400 and it came out in 1998, and you never, how would you find it, So there is a lot of sort of camaraderie about oh, you haven't heard of this, you should check it out. And it's not like oh, you haven't, how could you have not watched this? It's more like, oh, I'm so happy that you finally discovered this and you get to go enjoy it, So I have Hunting Matthew Nichols. That's one of the ones on my list that several people have told me is great. So
it is. We had the director Markian on, and he's wonderful. He was actually like in Hallmark movies before he decided like I want to make a movie. And the way he has done all of it, and especially like just with distribution and really fighting to get it like a theatrical release, even though it was kind of a limited one. But I've been patiently waiting for it to come on VOD or Blu-ray so I can buy it and like rewatch it again. But I do feel like with the found footage community is more like people aren't offended like, oh, you've never seen that before. Whereas in other subgenres of horror, people are really kind of like that. And if you haven't seen a certain classic horror movie, or honestly, even if you don't like it, like I've gotten that a lot. There's certain movies that I don't really particularly care for, and certain franchises I'm just not particularly a fan of. And you're almost like written off, and like they're trying to take your horror card. The only like spiff I will say with the found footage community, like with being like a woman, well, have you seen like August Underground that are just kind of the ones that are like borderline, just not, but I feel like that's just like, it's usually a man like, have you seen this? Or like, have you seen this? And it's like borderline snuff film. Like, no, I haven't. I don't think I'm going to. Thank you.
Listen, I'm with you on that. I haven't watched the August Undergrounds. I didn't watch Atraz. There's a short list of movies where I've seen the trailer. I get the sense of what they're going to be. And that's fine if other people enjoy it, but it's like, it's not my jam. There are certain things I'm not going to be interested in. And there's no reason. I don't have that need to like feel like I survived something, I'll put myself through it for the cred of having been able to watch it like that. I don't care about that. There's too many hours in the day and not enough hours in the day and too many movies to watch,
Exactly. Now, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. How has social media and smartphones changed the genre?
So I think in two ways. There's, I think, behind the scenes and in front of the camera. I think it's changed in both ways. In the behind the scenes, it's made it infinitely easier to make a movie. I literally shot the film. I shot Ask on the thing that I'm talking to you on right now. This cell phone is the thing I made the movie with. So like this film right here, shot entirely with a phone. So there's that aspect, and that has really broken down a ton of walls for filmmakers who just want to try and get their name out into the world as a potential filmmaker to work with other people, And some people, it's a one and done. In fact, there's a lot of people that are one and done found footage films because I think they thought, I'll make a dirt cheap movie, it'll get hugely successful, I'll make money. So they maybe were going into it with the wrong reasons. They weren't doing it because they wanted to be a filmmaker and then tell stories. But regardless, it's good because it has, like I said, like community theater, allowed for people to grow and to be able to express themselves and tap into art without having to go through the very rigorous and defined system that everybody else has to sort of soldier through. So that's the way I think it's changed from behind the scenes. In front of the camera, I think a lot of things have changed too, because I think a lot about the idea that not just smartphones, but the things we use on smartphones, like YouTube and social media, all of those things have changed. I was doing the math the other day, and I was thinking that probably within the last decade, there is now more content in the world that looks like found footage or fake documentary style content, real content, than narrative content. Because of the existence of YouTube, there is more content with someone looking straight into a camera and speaking extemporaneously, as if communicating with an audience through a camera. There's more of that in the world now than there is scripted narrative stuff that Hollywood made. And so when you think about that, you think, well, that's actually the dominant mode of communication now. That's the dominant visual mode of communication, is a human talking into a camera that's then being sent out to other people. So it totally makes sense that that would seep into the style of found footage storytelling. Like this is about an influencer. This movie is about a guy posting in a Reddit thread for sleepwalking. And so and I'm not the only one doing it. Obviously, tons of people are doing it. But found footage is oftentimes, it's like we found the footage and put it together. But sometimes it's also like a lost YouTube channel or something that was never uploaded from a camera and now it's uploaded. So there's definitely a connection to the idea of these devices having stored all this information, being the final witness, and sometimes the device is the final girl or the final guy. Everybody else dies, and the camera is the witness and the survivor. And that's very interesting in the way that it's completely shifted the way that we think about characters and survival and how someone's story is carried on,
Yeah, I really love when there is a found footage movie that involves influencers, content creators. I love it because it really kind of sheds a light on just some of the problematic things in content creation, like don't peek, missing couple, and we now have just kind of like a horror trope with that now, and I just really love it. I really enjoy it. I love Don't Peek so much. That was a really, really good one.
Yeah, well, so when I made Ask, the reason that I made it was specifically because I wanted to talk about what I saw as a very troubling movement of people gaining audience and therefore gaining respectability and people listening to them when they didn't know what they were talking about. Like the whole premise of my character in that movie is that he's a motivational guy, right? He business motivation. He doesn't know what he's doing. And you see the behind the scenes stuff and it's clear. He has no money. He's paying a dude from overseas to do a little bit of work for him. But he is not together like he is trying to put himself out to be. And I feel like I work in the marketing field. That's what I do for a living. And I've seen tons of these guys that are doing this, you know what I mean? Just trying desperately to convince someone else they're an expert so they'll give them money, or they'll treat them like the expert. And I was like, that's what I want to talk about in this movie. And that's why I talked about it, because I think a lot of influencers put themselves in that space. If hundreds of thousands of people listen to me, I must know what I'm talking about. Well, no, having a platform doesn't mean that you have knowledge. And that was something that was interesting to explore, I thought.
Yeah, that's something especially in the horror content creation community, there's just some people that are very comfortable with completely degrading and reading certain movies for filth, as far as indie horror films. And I'm just not, I don't know, me and Cass, when we have had just maybe not some so great horror movies that we've seen, but we've reviewed it because we've been asked to. We do not completely degrade the film because it takes a lot to make a movie. This is people's blood, sweat, and tears, time away from their family, their money. And I feel like some people who have bigger platforms and bigger follower accounts have a certain responsibility to, just because what you say in your opinion is not law. And I think spreading that, it's kind of culty. Spreading it to your followers oh, that's a bad movie, or you shouldn't be doing this, you should be doing this, but when the camera's off they're doing something else, and they're treating people horribly, and that's just not really, it's a big problem right now.
Yeah.
in just all content creation, just people that portray themselves to be one thing in front of the camera, but are completely different when the camera's off. And it's kind of troubling at times, I think. And
Yeah.
we're making some of the wrong people like go viral in a sense.
Yes. 100%. Well,
So
and here's the thing. I think a lot of people who don't make content, who are not content creators, don't realize how much of what is arriving in front of you has been decided upon not by the person making it and not by
Mhm.
you. It is by the machine in between that is deciding
yeah,
what will keep you paying attention, get you upset
yep,
or outraged and interacting. And what that
yep,
means is there are a lot of influencers, a lot of content creators who will chase that. They recognize
yeah,
that nuance is worthless. You know, a nice review or a review that is balanced is not going to do anywhere near as good as calling something hot garbage or saying the
yep,
worst thing that's come out in the last 10 years. Because that is the thing that catches outrage, it becomes viral. And so I think if you're not a content creator, you don't realize that this is a gamed system, much like a lot of opinion-based political news. It's about grabbing outrage to hold people because that is how they get money. And
yep,
they probably don't believe what it is that they're saying, or at least they're not
yeah,
entirely on board with what it is that they're saying, but they know that's how they get the clicks and that's how they get the money. And it's unfortunate. I do believe that there will be one day, there will be a reckoning for all of this when we realize that most people don't feel the way that they have purported to look in content that is being sold as someone's actual opinion. There will, some places, news organizations have gotten sued for pretending things are true and then finding out later
yeah,
that they're not true. And I think someday there will probably be regulation on this kind of stuff too. There just isn't now. And I think a lot of people fall victim to that. They hear 20
yeah,
people saying that some movie is bad because, it cast a black woman in it instead of should have been a white woman or whatever. And they
uh-huh.
think that means a ton of people think it. But no, what it actually means is like a small subset of people knew they could make a lot of money and get a lot of attention for saying something inflammatory. And, so yeah, it is an unfortunate sort of phenomenon.
I've only ever done like two bad like movie reviews. One was Weapons. I was very disappointed in that movie and I did not like it. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody was just like, this is horror movie of the year. And like before I watched Weapons, I had watched The Man with the Black Umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
And that movie was terrifying. Ricky, I'm still questioning like what goes on in your brain because it was a found footage movie and it was scary. And I saw Weapons and I'm just like, this is, I don't know, it almost made me want to quit like doing this stuff. And because like I'm not following into just some of these other creators, like what their opinions are. But I was like, no, we're not doing that because I've never been a follower and I'm just not going to. And the other one was I really liked Exorcist Believer. I think it was a great
Same.
story. And I loved that there was two possessed daughters. I thought the story was absolutely beautiful. I was not a fan. I'm not a fan of the first one. I think in some ways, granted, yes, I'm a 90s kid. I was born in 91. So I was not alive when The Exorcist came out. And I can respect how profound that was when it came out and just disturbing. But it didn't scare me. And I just think Believer was a lot better. And people just were like, that is insane that you would say that. Well, that's just how I feel. And it's one thing to just be saying you hate something just for like those clicks and to be, rolling in the money, but to just, we're allowed to have difference of opinions. And sometimes people just aren't very nice when it comes to that.
Yeah, well, and I have a sliding scale rule for, I generally, I don't tend to give negative reviews, period. Like if I don't like a movie,
Yeah.
I'm usually just quiet about it. If someone asks me, I'll tell them what I think, but I don't go out of my way to talk about it. However, what the rule I decided was that there is a sliding scale of what, if a movie costs less than $1 million, I will not go after it regardless, even if someone asks. And the reason for that is there is a difference in what you can get accomplished for $100,000 and what you can get accomplished for $40 million. If you have $40 million and you can't give me a good movie, then we're having a different conversation. If you made a movie for $150,000 and there are some problems with it, guess what? I'm going to meet you halfway. And I'm going to say, you did what you could with what you had, and you did a lot with what you had. I'm a dude that made a movie for $250. I am not the person to be judging anyone else for what kind of quality you can produce on no budget, But also I think when you're working on that level, you're not doing it with the intent to get rich. You can't possibly. Like there's no trail by which a
Yeah.
movie that small makes you rich, aside from, random times when, Obsession becomes the biggest theatrical release in a generation, and it was less than 1 million. But by and large, those movies are being made because an artist has a passion, has a thing that they want to do or say. And that becomes removed to me from the idea of a product. A $40 million thing, it might be artistic, but it's still a product. Someone gave you $40 million to make something. You had a responsibility to deliver a thing that a bunch of people wanted to watch to pay that money back. Artists are working on tiny scales. If you're working with that much money, you are still an artist, yes, but you're also a technician and you're a gun for hire, And so I see those as slightly different roles that also require me to look at them as slightly different ways when I talk about them as a critic,
Yeah, I have to agree. I have no problem with I'm not going to necessarily go out of my way to like make a review of a bad big studio movie, but I am definitely more comfortable with saying my thoughts and feelings on it. Like Scream 7, I went and saw that in theaters, and me and my husband, we don't really have a chance to like go on a date night very much. We have 3 boys. My oldest has severe autism and is nonverbal. We just don't really have a lot of help to watch all of them. So it was a big deal for us to like go see this. And it was going good until that third act, and when they revealed the ghost faces. And I was just so I'm just like, this isn't even Scream. I don't know what this is. And it's just like, you guys have all this money and the budget. And it's not even so much, I'm just seeing a lot of story writing and the script writing really missing in the bigger studio ones, where there's just more heart in the indie horror films. And it takes a lot to make a movie, and I'm just not going to, even if I don't like it, I'm just not going to review it, or if I have to, I'm going to say constructive things, but I'm not going to tell you not to go watch it just because I didn't maybe like it. You may like it.
Yeah.
Now,
well, and I do think there's a division nowadays too with, I think there's, first of all, we talked about the lack of nuance. Everything is either an amazing movie or the worst piece of crap you've ever seen. But I also think we've kind of gotten spoiled in the modern day. I'm a little older than you. I was born in 78. So I lived through an era where you didn't have constant access to everything that came out. You were stuck with, whatever was playing on cable TV. You didn't, you had VHS tapes and stuff like that. But the idea that we constantly have everything at our disposal means that people are not willing to give things a chance in the way that they used to.
Yeah.
And they're also not willing to say, I watched that whole thing. It was fine. Like that doesn't even exist in the language anymore. The idea like a movie was okay, it was just fine. Like, where did that go? Most movies are actually just okay, And I also lived in a time when bad movies were much worse than bad movies are now. Like, a bad movie now is normally because it's poorly written or poorly executed. But like the special effects, the film quality, all that stuff is incredibly superior to I can shoot with this phone a better image in my pocket than like a person who doesn't know how to make movies could in the 1980s, having to shoot on film. It would look like garbage unless they were a trained person, trained professional. So I think a lot of the times that we have just kind of forgotten what our level of being spoiled is for access to content and also the just raised level of even what mediocre content would be considered nowadays is so much better than what mediocre content was from before.
Well, I remember being a kid and like watching AMC Fear Fest. They have it every year for the month of October, and even on Fridays. I don't think a lot of people remember that, but they had Fear Fest Fridays, or just like going to the Blockbuster or Family Video and scanning through all the horror movies, and just you had to get through some bad ones to get to the good ones. Like, that was just a part of it. But we do have just an overconsumption of being able to access anything and everything now. And horror has become super big since COVID, and because of Terrifier too, I think. Not sure why. I like Terrifier. I wasn't a fan of the third one. But a lot of people that weren't horror movie fans kind of are now, which is cool. But I think it's definitely kind of oversaturated things a little bit. Now, to talk about Go to Sleep, your movie, where did the idea for this movie come from?
Well, I have to give credit to Steven for the kernel of the idea, because essentially the way it came up was he and I had been trying to find a thing to make. He helped me with Ask. He did some editing on that, and he appears at the beginning and the end in a very small role, not an actor. So I actually owe him big that he was willing to do that. But he wanted to make something. And I was like, I don't know, what do you want to do? We're constantly trying to make stuff. He lives like an hour away from me, so it's not the easiest thing in the world. And then he was like, well, I had this idea for a YouTube channel kind of thing, like a bunch of videos about a guy who's filming his wife because she's sleepwalking, and then something happens where there's like a mysterious other figure. And I was like, well, that's interesting to me, but I'm also old fashioned. I don't want to make a YouTube series. Like, if we're going to make a series of videos that's long enough to be a movie, let's just make it a movie, is my first thought. And then my second thought, because my producer brain always goes into action, is, well, what if instead of someone filming a separate person, why don't we make it even more isolating? Why doesn't the person by themselves and they're sleepwalking, so they have to put up cameras because they don't know what's happening to them, and the only way they find out is by looking back at the footage. So it was his original kernel of an idea, and then me sort of like, utilizing the what do we have at our disposal kind of thing to work from, the where we came to what we came to. And then added to that, the big, for me, I always try to come up with a challenge when I make a movie. The first one was, can I make a movie for less than $200? And this one was, can we make a movie in, basically we made it in 32 hours. We had 36 hours that we were planned, but we got it done in 32. And so we rented an Airbnb and shot the entirety of this movie essentially from 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon until midnight Saturday evening.
You stayed awake the whole time, like during that time making it. Isn't that correct?
I did not. No, Steven was awake for most of the time, mostly out of panic and anxiety. For the 6 hours I was sleeping, he was up worrying about getting all the shots we needed for the next day and stuff. But no, I had to crash because the whole first night we were doing all of the really physical stuff in the house. Me walking around doing like the weird exercises and then like the running out into the woods. So I was doing all of that stuff for several hours. So when it hit 2 a.m, I was just like, I'm out, guys. I'll see you at 7:30. Fell asleep. And he was still, like pulling footage off of the drives and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think he got any sleep. So I guess technically we were there for 32 hours. We shot for less than that because, there was the 6 hours I was sleeping. But yeah, it was a compressed timeline. And in a way, I think it was really helpful to the project because it kept me in the emotional state the character needed to be in, which was I was panicked about what was happening. And I think both Steven and I were a little panicked because we were like, we have to get everything by tomorrow night because that's it. Once we're done, we can't get back in here without paying several $100s more again. So we got to get it all. So that energy actually, I think, helps to make the movie work. But those were the crazy decisions that brought us to the making of this movie.
Now, what was your favorite scene to film in this movie?
Well, there were several that I enjoyed making and some that I was not as crazy about. I didn't love going into the pool. Because it was November. It was Florida, but it was November. And you can see in the movie there is physical evidence of the condensation coming out of my mouth because it was a cold night in November. And when you rent an Airbnb, you have to pay extra to warm the pool. And we did not have the extra money, so I did not pay to warm that pool. So that's very cold water I was going into. But I really enjoyed we'll call it the training sequence where I was sleeping at night, but I was like doing weird exercises and like rolling around. Yes. I really enjoyed shooting that one. And then while it wasn't fun to shoot, I was very excited about the sequence in front of the bathroom mirror. That was the one I was most excited to shoot because I knew that was going to be, if we pulled it off right, was going to be the set piece of the movie. It would be the thing that people remembered more than anything else if we did it right. And that has borne out. Most people say of all the things that they remember about the movie, the eyeball scene is the thing that they remember the most. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say it was...
Yeah, that freaked me out. I'm like, oh my God, it's on his tongue. It's in his eye. Stop it.
Yeah. And I will tell you, this is not an endorsement. Do not try this at home. It was a fake knife, but that was a real stunt. I was actually scraping my eyeball with it. There's no visual effect that I actually legitimately did that. And like I said, do not try that at home. I do not recommend it. But I just knew, I can control my, I can sort of zen out and not freak out enough to be able to do that moment. And I just knew it was going to be really effective because of how slow and how long it happened. Like it wasn't going to be a scare moment. It wasn't going to be a jump. It was going to be how discomforting can we make it because of how long and how quiet it is,
It was very, very uncomfortable for a very long time. But it's definitely, that was definitely one of my favorite scenes of the movie, besides the ending. But I don't want to spoil the ending because it was such a nice twist that I just wasn't expecting at all. Please, guys, just go watch it. Okay, it's on Found TV. Go watch it. Now, what are the themes you wanted audiences to take away from this movie?
Well, because we started with the idea of someone sleepwalking, I knew thematically what was interesting to me about that was in what ways symbolically are we all sleepwalking? In what ways are we navigating through the world without putting enough concentrated and focused effort into what we're doing so that it becomes autopilot or it becomes a thing we're not paying attention to as we're doing? And so that's where the idea of his job, what he does in the movie, where that came from. And then ultimately, I think what the revelation at the end is about, because both of my movies have actually been in some ways about technologies and the way that humans are changed maybe for the worse as a result of their interactions with them. But for me, like the big takeaway with this movie, I would hope you watching it would say, you know what, that there actually are a lot of things that I have not paid attention to, the fact that I have been comfortable letting something else in my life take over that I should probably still be engaged with. You know, it's like, it's nice. The idea of having autopilot in your car is nice, but also driving there's a reason that you drive, you know what I mean? Because you want to get to a place, and like checking out, like putting other things in your life on autopilot means that getting to that place is not as valuable to you because you didn't work to get there. And the rewards and the struggles that you get from, I call it like, I call it think weight. You know, like when you lift a weight, that's what gives you a muscle, right? If you never move your arm, you won't have any muscles. And I think the same thing about the way that you engage your brain with the world. If you don't use it, it ends up atrophying. And then one day you're not going to be able to simply do the things that you used to be able to do. And it seems like a convenience to have something else do it now. But there will be a day when you're going to wish that you were able to do the thing you used to be able to do, and you can't anymore because you just let that muscle lapse, you know?
Yeah, I really resonated with just how when he realizes like he's sleepwalking and just researching things with sleepwalking and trying to attribute it to what is going on in his life right now. And what really resonated with me was just like he was very analytical, and he could put the words and the why to what was happening, but being able to feel that. And those are some things that I am kind of dealing with, and just a healing journey that I am kind of currently on, that like I can analyze and rationalize certain traumatic situations or things that have happened in my life. And I guess just kind of like accept it for that, but like to getting to that next feeling of feeling it. But like you were just saying, it's like an autopilot, and just living life on autopilot. Like I can analyze and rationalize and explain what a situation was, but how is it making me feel? And not being able, like you also said, like it's like a muscle, and you do have to work it, and when you don't, you kind of lose it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are tons of people in the world right now that go throughout their day not realizing that there are huge portions of the day where they're disassociating, where they're escaping some sort of pain by shutting off, and it's never been couched to them in those terms, and so they don't see it as that. You know, it's a coping mechanism, or it's just the way that you unwind when you get home or whatever, and they don't realize they're just shutting off from something. And I think that's a dangerous instinct, only because if you do it long enough and it doesn't feel good, it just doesn't feel anything at all, you keep chasing that, you know, and then you eventually end up in there more than you're engaged. And like you said, sort of being able to feel and interact emotionally. So I think it works both on a symbolic level, like what I'm talking about in our interactions with technology, but I also think it works on a mental health level, you know, of not disengaging so much from life that you can't get back into it, you know, that you're dissociating and then not able to cope with things. And then like anytime you come up against that particular kind of thing, that's automatically what happens, kind of beyond your control, you know?
Yeah, it really is. Now, what do you hope audiences are talking about after they're finished watching Go to Sleep?
Well, I hope they talk to each other about what they thought the ending meant, because I think Stephen and I discussed it quite a bit. And I think I told you I didn't have a set script for the movie, but the only thing that I had actually written out fully was my dialogue in the very final vlog sequence. I mapped out what I was going to say in that sequence. And it was very important for me to do that because the goal of that sequence was twofold. It was, I wanted to be able to say a thing that on its surface could be true and an audience member could believe it. But underneath the surface, the exact opposite of what the character is saying could also be true. And in order for those two things to balance simultaneously and to feel like the ambiguity of either of those things being a potential actual explanation to exist, I knew I had to write it out. You know, I had to be able to, I couldn't just wing it the way that I did with some other sequences where it's just more about the emotion of the moment. But what I would like them to take away is to be able to say, you know, that's a good point. What he said is a good point. The idea of being removed from your own life, you know, like the situation with his relationship, I think is instructive, I think, to people. You're sometimes you're so focused on what you need to achieve in life and to pay your bills and to take care of the whatever that you're losing very important opportunities for connection with other people in your life.
Yep.
And I would hope that that was another thing that they took away too, that he created a lot of the problems he has in this movie. This is not just a monster from without that ruins his life. This is more similar to like a film noir movie where he made a big mistake that starts to unravel his life, but the mistake started with him. You know, it didn't come from outside. And so I think that's an important, I think, lesson to take away. I hope people would see.
Now, what advice would you give someone wanting to make their first found footage film?
This I'm so glad you asked this question. I always try to tell anybody who's talking about this. I think the best thing that you can do, which is the opposite of the biggest mistake that most people make, is when they want to make a movie, they come up with an idea and then they try to figure out how to make that idea happen. My suggestion, I did it with Ask, and I have helped other filmmakers with their first films do the same thing, which is don't try to come up with an idea that you like and then figure out, can I make this thing? What you need to do is reverse engineer, what do I have? And then work your way backwards from all of the things that you have to figure out how to use as much of it as possible to make a movie. Like when I made Ask, I'm not sure if I told you about this. We've talked a couple of times, but I don't know if I ever told you, the reason I made it is because I was getting, my front 6 teeth were really bad shape. They were damaged severely because for many reasons. But anyway, I was getting them basically shaven down and they were going to be recapped. And so like one day I'd have these terrible teeth and then a few days later I would have a brand new set of teeth. And I was like, that's too good an opportunity to not do something with. So I was like, all right, that's going to be the centerpiece of this story. And what I did is I just worked backwards from that one big production value thing that I had. And then I said, well, I travel for my job. I had to go to Vegas for a trip and I had to go to Kentucky for a trip. So I can use those. I got these weird gifts from these marketing people that were trying to woo my boss. So like I had those gifts. So I'm like, I'll fold that in. And so I was just gathering all these pieces of things that I already had access to or ownership of. And then my job was not to come up with a great idea and figure out how to execute it. It was, how do I take as many of these crazy, interesting things that look like production value and put them all into a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end? Because then it looks intentional and it looks like you put forth much more effort to create things that you actually just had at your disposal already, you know?
Right. That's really, really good advice. I've thought about within the past few months of making just like a short. I live in kind of rural Ohio and out in the country, and it's just kind of like a perfect area to be doing something like that. So that is very, very good advice. What is next for you now?
I'm just going to say, but I don't want to interrupt you, but I just wanted to say, if you want to do that, I absolutely think you should. And you know where to find me if you ever want to brainstorm anything. Because I don't take a bunch of victory laps about skills and talents I have. But one that I'm very good at is helping people figure out how to get the thing they, you know, if they want to do something, how to reverse engineer and make that thing happen. I did it with 2 filmmaker friends of mine so far. So I'm glad to. If you want to do it, I would love to help out.
Absolutely. I will definitely take you up on that. But what is next for you after Go to Sleep?
Well, so speaking of my friend that I helped do that with, his name is Dan Scully. He had a small part in Go to Sleep. He was the friend, the paralegal that I talked to on the phone.
Okay, yeah.
So his name is Dan Scully. He was also in Ask, and actually he was one of the interview subjects in Found Footage Find. So we've known each other for a while. Okay. I finally encouraged him that he should direct his own film. He had a race coming up. He was going to run I think it's a half marathon or something, and he was training for it. And I was like, dude, that's too good a setup for us to not do something with. If it's going to end with you going to this race, we need to come up with an idea for a story that's like a found footage style story. And so I pitched him on an idea and he was like, oh my God, that's amazing. So he shot part of his part. I shot about 20 minutes of footage for my part, and it's finished. It had a film festival run, and we're looking for a home for it now. It's called Peak Form, and it's a really
Okay.
interesting found footage horror film that's kind of in the health and wellness / men's rights awareness space. It's sort of like
Okay.
the danger of how men trying to better themselves kind of get sucked into the incel community, but from sort of
Yes.
like a found footage horror perspective. And I think I haven't seen anything else out there like this, and I think it's really interesting. Dan did an amazing job, so that's the next thing. We're just trying to find a home for it now. And then I co-directed a feature with Richard Waters, who made the two Distort films.
Okay.
He actually lives in Ireland and I live in Florida, but we each shot part of a movie and we're making it together. And it'll be really interesting if we can pull it off. I think it'll be pretty impressive if we can make a movie where my character interacts with his character, even though he shot everything of his in Ireland and I shot all of mine in Florida. So
I think that'll be interesting. That peak form, that sounds really good. And I like just the idea of like the male incel thing. I don't think anyone's ever done that, and yeah, people need to be doing that. So I will definitely be looking out for that. But where can everybody find you?
So I'm on, I guess, on social media. On Instagram, I'm just Chris Vander Kaay. I think I'm actually just Chris Vander Kaay most places, but I'll just tell you
Yeah.
Vander Kaay. Vander is spelled the way you think, but K is spelled Kaay, two A's, just to keep it confusing because I'm Dutch. But yeah, I'm Chris Vander Kaay there. I think I basically post on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky sometimes, and I have a YouTube channel called Big Fan of Your Work. But most of the content is the same across all of them. So you just follow me one place. You don't have to go crazy. But yeah, I tend to post like short video stuff about film. I also do clips of podcasts and stuff like that. And I occasionally do long form stuff. But I also, use those places to inform anytime a new project is coming down the pipe. So definitely if you're following me there, you'll know about it when it's coming.
Yeah, you are pretty active, especially in like the found footage groups, and I always see your posts. But thank you so much, Chris, for coming on. This was a blast. And you guys go to sleep. It is on Found TV. But until next time, it's stay weird and stay spooky. Bye.